Hello, everybody. I'm Cynthia Stremb. I'm the Director of Volunteers and State and Local Advocacy with PAVE. We're going to be discussing the tobacco industry use of predatory tactics intended to try to impact state and local policy making. First, I'd like to introduce our speakers. We have Del Monte Jefferson, who is the Executive Director at the Center for Black Health and Equity. Mark Meany is the Deputy Director of Commercial Tobacco Control Programs at the Public Health Law Center. And Kurt Rivesel is a professor and chair of the Department of Health Behavior at the University of North Carolina. Welcome, everybody. We have a good discussion coming up. I want to set the stage by saying that the industry has used many tactics to try to delay, stall, or influence policy. Some of these tactics include preemption, referenda, litigation, and cultural arguments for product exemptions. The tobacco industry paints public health efforts as government overreach and a denial of individual rights. The tactics are meant to distract lawmakers and citizens from the real issues at hand, and they create doubt and confusion over what's best for the communities. All of these tactics turn attention and resources away from important tobacco control work. I'm going to pass the first question to you, Del Monte, but throughout, I hope you'll all just, jump in when you have something to add. Del Monte, we often hear about the tobacco industry playbook and that they've been using this same playbook they're using now. They've been using since before e-cigarettes even came on the scene. Would you explain broadly what that playbook is, and are the tactics we just discussed part of it?
Yes, thanks for having me. The tactics that you just mentioned are exactly those things that the tobacco industry has used historically. Even if you go back to 2009, when they excluded menthol flavors from the Tobacco Control Act, the industry came out with those same tactics at that time to distract and confuse our populations and our advocates from the real issue at hand. And so if you just think about it, they did just that. They had cultural arguments. They went and they got some of our leaders and they got our spokespersons from African-American communities to say that, well, wait a minute, we don't want to ban menthol because, it would lead to a criminalization of Black youth and Black people. And so that's a cultural argument. Now, that argument didn't come from our communities. It was used by our communities, but it was initiated by the tobacco industry and suing, of course, as we started getting some traction. And as we started getting a ban on the sale of mentholated tobacco products in different communities, starting in Chicago. They litigated, they sued and they sued again and they continued suing. And so everywhere we had success, it had to be challenged, which is how come it was so important for that litigation to happen from our standpoint, because we were successful. We fought back the litigation, but that didn't stop them from trying. And so we're going to continue to see the same playbook. We're going to continue to see them suing, appropriating our culture. And in other cases, because they have, just this vast amount of resources, we're going to see them using that to affect politicians. And politicians in terms of preemption in certain states. And so we keep seeing the tobacco industry using these tactics. We are not surprised. The title of this section is appropriate. All it does is distract and confuse us.
So is this forewarned, forearmed?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, prepare yourselves, Prepare.
Right. Okay, so next I want to turn to Mark. This is about a specific tactic that we've seen in state after state, and that's the tobacco industry pushing for state level laws that take away control from local governments local health departments, preemption. As tobacco, unfortunately, as tobacco control advocates will tell us, local level is where meaningful change is made. Mark, would you discuss in a bit more detail what preemption is and how the tobacco industry has weaponized it?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Cynthia. And thanks for inviting me to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to join you today and for putting on this great conference and the work that you do. I apologize. I'm getting over COVID last week. I avoided it for 2 years and then it finally hit me. So I'm feeling fine, but my voice is a little spotty. But I think, Cynthia, your question on just explaining what preemption is really demonstrates in a lot of ways how pernicious this strategy is and how effective it's been for the tobacco industry, because it's a bad combination of a policy that can be kind of difficult to understand, a little bit nebulous, but it's extraordinarily powerful. And we have found that it's also difficult, not impossible, but it's really difficult to remedy. So the idea of preemption, kind of the basic definition of what it is pretty simple. It's when a higher level of government restricts the authority of a lower level of government to regulate in a certain area. So it's like, and it's a fundamental principle of our system of law. So if the federal government has a law that conflicts with a state government or a state with a local government, there has to be some way of figuring out which one is going to supersede the other one, and that makes perfect sense. Or if an area, if the state says we're going to be the only area that's going to regulate in this realm, then locals can't regulate there. So it kind of makes sense fundamentally. We have to have something like that. But it wasn't until the 1980s when the tobacco industry was the first industry ever to say, hey, we can use this, we can weaponize this this really kind of simple policy. So instead of having to work at every local government and in opposition to policies, we can just, if we can get preemption implemented at state level, we avoid having to deal with all of that. And that's really what they ended up doing. And so the first statewide preemptive law was in Florida in 1985 for smoke-free laws, and it is still on the books. And it tells you how difficult it is to remove preemption. And it's been a policy that's been very, very essential to the industry. They've expanded it to other areas, to point of sale, to many other tobacco control areas. And as you said also, Cynthia, that we know that the best policies are often developed at the local level, and that they're identified, they're developed to identify and to solve a particular problem that's unique to a community, and then they're often tweaked and they're made better, and then other communities adopt them, and then eventually it kind of trickles its way upward to the state level. And so when you remove that ability of local governments to function that way, the policy initiatives really end up getting stalled. And then I think, the other parts of it, what makes this particularly problematic is that what ends up happening is that often preemption, the scope of preemption is not always clear by the language of the law. And so courts end up being required to define how much local activity is preempted. And so local governments often, they're underfunded. They don't have the resources often to litigate. And so they know that the industry does and is really all too happy to file lawsuits. So even the language of the preemptive laws ends up getting expanded because local governments stay kind of wide and clear of where those boundaries could be, just to avoid the possibility of litigation occurring. And I think to kind of demonstrate, when we talk about the playbook of the industry, that Del Monte talked about before, when there was a litigation in the US v. Philip Morris case a number of years ago, a lot of the documents that were disclosed from the industry and their marketing materials, internal marketing materials, and one of them said that they're not married to any particular form of preemption, but they're dead serious about achieving it in all 50 states. So we know this is a really fundamental principle, a fundamental goal that they are trying to achieve. And then I think the other last thing, I'm sorry, I know that I'm going on a long time about this, but is that preemption has ended up being expanded to many other policy areas. I think the tobacco industry started it, developed it, and expanded it, but now it's being used in employment areas and in human rights, environmental laws, and gun laws. And then most recently with COVID, regarding public health measures like masks or vaccination requirements. So I think that we're seeing it a lot more expansively. And I think the final piece is that we really need to see this as a fundamental health equity issue. We know that preemptive laws end up restricting a local community from developing policies that are going to help their own citizens. And what often happens with the tobacco industry, because they are targeting people of color and other disenfranchised folks, LGBTQ communities, those are the people that suffer the most, and it just ends up exacerbating health disparities.
Yeah, it's such a complicated issue, really. And I know that when preemption happens in a state, I hear from the prevention health groups, and they basically all say, we feel like our hands are tied. There's nothing we can do.
Yeah, I would love to add something on
sure.
that. We are strongest in tobacco control at the local level, as Mark was saying. And so that is why the industry tried to thwart the local progress. Tobacco control has really been a incremental sort of endeavor. There gets to be a community. Sometimes it tends to be these smaller, innovative communities that get a policy in place. It was kind of a long shot. They get a policy in place. Then another community nearby gets a little bit better policy. Then a big city gets it. And then they expand it and really make it even better. This is sort of historically what has happened. And if you think back about why the industry fears it, it's think about the battleground for a policy. And if you go to testify, I live in a small town, 60,000 people. If I go to our town council and we testify, hypothetically, I would love to be pushing for a flavor ban, but we're preempted in North Carolina, so I'm not allowed to. But hypothetically, if I did, professors would go there, physicians, nurses, school nurses would go. We would have youth advocates. They would talk about the need for a flavor ban. There would be community leaders, NAACP groups would go. There'd be all kinds of groups going. Then tobacco industry lobbyists will stream in and talk. And who is our town council going to listen to between these two groups? Okay, a bunch of people in suits who've come from somewhere else to try and block, what's going on with at a local level. Now they're much stronger. The industry is much stronger at the state level legislatures and at the federal level, and so that's why they want to block any of this sort of local progress because they know that it'll continue to get build and build and build, and then eventually become possibly a state law.
Yeah. And if I can just add one more thing to that, Cynthia, when Kurt and Mark, what you just said, our prime example is Chicago. I mean, just imagine if Illinois had preemption where locals couldn't work, we never would have had that first city to actually have a law banning the sale of mentholated tobacco products. And so that whole movement wouldn't have gotten started if preemption was there as well in Illinois, preventing that fight. And so as Kirk said, it started there, but then it snowballed and other localities started doing it. And then we had a moment and now well over 150 plus local ordinance banning the sale of mentholated tobacco products that never would have happened had preemption been in place. And so the only thing I'd like to say on that is the single most thing you can do to ensure that a policy is not rooted in equity is to have preemption on the boards. And so that's how you can guarantee you're not going to have an equity-centered policy because of the preemption.
Okay, I have to ask this question. It's probably much longer and more complicated than we have time for, but once preemption is in place in a state, is there anything we can do to get rid of it?
Yeah, and let me just say, it's interesting because in some places, preemption is on board and legislators that voted for it didn't even know the outcome, didn't even know what they were voting for and the impact that it would have. And so we have to keep educating our communities. We have to keep educating our legislators so that they can say, if I voted for it, well, I need to overturn this. This is not right, and I need to do something about it. So that education has to continue. The community capacity building has to continue.
I want to make one more point. I just tying Kurt and Delmonte's comments together too about the proliferation of local policies that leads to, kind of keeps expanding to the state level. And that was the flavors is the ideal example where there was Providence, New York City first, flavors that didn't include menthol, but then went to Chicago, then went to San Francisco. And I think, there was litigation all along the way. And thankfully the policies were upheld, and it expanded to, to what we're seeing now, this proliferation of policies around the country at the state and at local and state levels. In terms of repealing preemption, it is difficult. It certainly can be done, and it has been done. And I know there was some repeal in North Carolina that Kurt probably knows a lot more about than I do. It was a partial repeal. This legislative session, there was a repeal of smoke-free preemption in Tennessee. Oregon has had some repeal of preemption. So there are examples of it, but it really takes a lot of, exactly I think what Delmonte was talking about, that it takes a lot of people, a lot of education. I think again, as I said, it's a fairly simple concept, but it gets complicated in the details. And I think that there's a lot of competing narratives that can really obfuscate it, unfortunately too much. And so I think that, we need to be very clear that preemption in our tobacco control world is a bad thing. It's funded by the industry, it's propagated by the industry, and all it does is ends up costing lives and exacerbating health disparities.
Yeah, I think we can have a whole session on this. I have so many more questions, but we have to move on. So, I'm going to say, we're currently dealing with a huge industry effort to undermine state policy in California. We had a statewide flavor ordinance passed to end the sale of most flavored tobacco products, but the industry filed a referendum intended to delay and perhaps stall implementation until the next statewide election when the public will vote. And we just saw the same thing on a smaller scale in Washington County, Oregon, and very happily, we had a positive outcome there just last week. But Kurt, would you use California as an example to illustrate how the industry uses referenda to delay and, potentially undo public health policies?
Yes, California is a fantastic example. It just so happens I'm in California now. I normally live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, but I am at the California Tobacco Control Program advisory board meeting where we're looking at all the data about what's going on. And California has the second lowest smoking rate in the nation behind Utah. And you're seeing, I just saw a 6.5% smoking rate among adults. So this is really, really impressive what's been done in California. So of course it's going to attract the attention of the industry. As you noted, there was a bill, California Senate Bill 793, that was signed into law in August of 2020. And it was designed to ban tobacco product flavors and flavor enhancers. Now, it was supposed to go into effect January of 2021, but it became blocked because there was a referendum that the tobacco industry was behind that would undo it. Okay, and so this is really trench warfare. Anytime there's anything that happens, there's going to be a counter response, and it's just as I said, it's sort of a constant battle. The campaign, so we'll find out in November of 2022, November of this year, what happens, who will prevail. I'm optimistic that the tobacco industry will lose and that this flavor ban will be allowed to go into place. But there's a couple sneaky things that the industry does. So one is they set up these campaigns with names that are a little bit confusing. And so that's why I think hence the title for this session. So there's a campaign called the California Coalition for Fairness. Everyone would love fairness. I mean, it sounds like a good idea, but it's who's backing it? RJ Reynolds Tobacco Company with over 10.3 million in funding, and Philip Morris with 9.8 million in funding. And these are numbers from just the end of last year. So there's been even more money plowed into this campaign to fight it and really confuse the voters. Similarly, there's a San Francisco initiative where they had banned vapor products not approved by FDA and flavored vaping products. And there was an initiative to undo this by a group called the Coalition for Responsible Vaping. And they had this proposition where they're pushing yes on Proposition C called Stop Youth Vaping. And again, you would think, well, we want Stop Youth Vaping initiative. But Juul Labs donated $19 million, and they were pretty much the primary financial backer of this initiative. Luckily, it was defeated, and there are the policy has been able to be in place. But this, you'll see a lot of this kind of work, deep pockets from the tobacco companies fighting any type of policy or regulation, and in addition to potential for litigation. They'll work with their own policymakers. They'll try and preempt policy in the first place. They'll try and set up an initiative, a referendum, and confuse people to vote for something that they probably really did not want to vote for. So it's a constant battle.
Yeah, I mean, I know in Oregon County, for instance, it was, vote no. In California, it's vote yes. And it's like, I know when I go to the ballot box and there's a referendum, I have to read it 5 times to figure out, to make sure I'm getting it right. So I could imagine, you could have this very popular ordinance, which in both cases it was and it is, and yet people could easily vote incorrectly. Mark or Del Monte, did you want to add anything in there?
Well, it's just that the title again is so appropriate, because that confusion, as Kurt was talking about, having those front groups, if they were to come out and Philip Morris or Juul say, hey, this is our coalition and we're against this, we know good and well that most people would be anti on the other side, because what it is that they're doing is not trying to promote health. And so their ability to use their pockets to get these front groups it really tries to undermine our successes. And you absolutely, like you said, Cynthia, you got to be sure going into the ballot. I mean, it's kind of difficult to walk in there and to see it and then to respond to it right there. And you've got to know going in, have done your homework, what it is that you're voting for.
Right, and we have these very deep pockets on the part of the tobacco industry supporting these kinds of efforts, and then we have, tobacco control, who has very, very shallow pockets. So, again, all of those dollars get diverted toward these kinds of, to counter these tactics on the part of the tobacco industry.
But something I would also say, the advantage they have is then the policy, at least in California, it stayed basically until after the vote. So they get, that window of time when it would have taken effect, which was last in 2021, right? So they get, they really almost get 2 years of continue to sell the products in the state.
Right. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and then in that time, it's estimated that in the time that it took between when it would have been implemented and when it will be, which, if there's a yes vote, if it's positive, then probably January, right, of what year is that, 2023? In that time, the tobacco industry will have generated $1.9 billion from menthol cigarettes alone. So, and then another 37,000 or so high school kids will be initiated into e-cigarette use. So another thing is the industry has also has enormous resources to give to lobbyists. They use it to influence public opinion and legislation, and they repeatedly use cultural arguments to help sell, to fight for exempting products from public health policies. Del Monte, you recently remarked, only a bleak satirist could dream up a scheme as cynical as the tobacco industry hiring Black civil rights advocates to help sell products that kill Black people. I'm sure you said it much more beautifully than I just did. but could you take us through some examples of what this looks like?
Well, yeah, it's about appropriating culture. It's about appropriating culture. It's coming in, you know, and making these donations, these big donations to cultural events. And think about the Cool Jazz Festival. It happened for years. You know, that was an event that I used to attend, by the way. But what we're doing, you know, with the white shirts on, with the cool, with the white hats on, with the cool, we're walking around advertising for this product because they came in. They had you know, the best musicians and the ones that were popular at that time, and they were just appropriate in our culture. And so by doing so, we became endeared to them. And then after they got us endeared to them, you know, to give money to our leaders, to our spokespersons, and say, hey, look, this is the cause that I want you to present. That, you know, that's cynical. I mean, just to even think that you would do something like that. First of all, that the industry would do it, but secondly, that our leaders would take the money. That's another bad thing, taking the money from the tobacco industry to be their mouthpiece. And so, and we've got leaders that have done that are doing that. I mean, even last month, when the FDA announced, you know, the proposed rules, we had some of those same leaders speaking out against the proposed rules and using the same argument. Again, this is the tobacco playbook that the industry was using over a decade ago about criminalization in our communities, even though there's absolutely no evidence of this happening so far. So, you know, so yes, it's really disheartening because there are some instances where we need our leaders. There are things that are happening, social injustices happening all the time, and we need our leaders to speak out on these issues, and we need to support them and be behind them as they're doing so. But I tell you, it's confusing. It also distracts and confuses there, because I find it difficult to stand by and support a leader that I know is taking industry money and then turning around and saying things on behalf of the industry. And so, you know, so that really distracts and confuses, not just on the tobacco issue, but on other social justice issues that are impacting our populations.
Right. You have the same people coming and speaking out, you know, against, you know, some horrendous things have happened, and people, you know, it respect and listen to them. And then you have them, you know, talking about these products, which are absolutely intended, as you say, to kill people, kill Black people. You know what, it's very tricky. So, you know, so what do you do about that? Like, how do you bring attention to that in a way that is not, you know, also alienating those same people who are doing good work?
Yeah, that's the issue. What do you do about it? And that's the whole education. That's building community capacity. And so that's talking with our communities and letting them know what's going on with the industry, what their playbook is, who they're giving money to, who is a mouthpiece for them. We have to let our communities know that. There's many communities that we've talked with that didn't know that some of our leaders were on the payroll of the industry. And once they find out, you know, it's a different thing. Oh, so that's why they came and they were trying to talk to us about this issue. So just making them aware, that's building capacity.
All right, thank you. Mark, were there any other implications of product exemptions, or are there any other implications?
There are. I think, you know, kind of adding on to what Delmani was saying, I think that the use of these specious social justice arguments to create an avenue for exempting certain products from regulation is something that we're seeing done more effectively, often at the 11th hour. You know, things like hookah exemptions, menthol exemptions, you know, saying that, you know, that there's a, you know, arguing that this is going to be in some way enforced against the individual users, which is not how any effective policies are drafted. You know, I think that's, and it's not, they're not grounded in the use patterns of the products anywhere, or the cultural significance, especially of hookah. I think that what we always say that, look at any time that there's an exemption proposed for a policy, it's never done with any public health purpose in mind. It's always done to really improve the industry's bottom line. It's never done. What ends up doing is it continues to disenfranchise and harm the same people who've always been harmed. One thing that we have found that's effective, though, in some cases, though, even when sometimes the public health argument isn't effective for compelling legislators, but sometimes by saying, when you have exemptions in policies, you also increase the likelihood of litigation. You also increase the chance that there's going to be an equal protection claim that could strike down a law. And sometimes that can be more compelling to a city attorney and to local officials when they say, hey, if it's a better way to avoid litigation, have a more comprehensive policy, maybe that's the best approach. And of course, it's the best approach from a public health perspective as well.
Well, why is that it would make, would make the policy more susceptible to legal challenges?
Because if you treat two businesses that are similar in different ways, you have to have some, just even a rational reason why you're doing so. And so that, that's what we've seen that in, one example is the litigation against in San Francisco when they prohibited the sale of tobacco products in certain pharmacies. And so there's litigation, and what San Francisco ended up doing is saying, okay, then all pharmacies are going to be tobacco free, which ended up, with a good result. But anytime you separate different kinds of retailers and treat, have restrictions on one and not the other, there is that potential for, a lawsuit and at least having to explain why you're treating them differently.
Okay. Anybody have anything else to add, or?
Well, the other part of that is, when you have an exemption is like a hole. And if you've got a hole in anything, then bad things can seep in or bad things can seep out. And so, you don't want to have those holes. And so the more comprehensive you can have it, the better. If there is a hole, we can always be sure that the industry will find that hole and exploit that hole. Right.
Product exemptions are so typically used in, in bill hearings and, language, whatever, to, to give an opportunity to bargain, with legislators. So not good, huh?
There's a long history of that with the smoke-free laws too, and exempting certain types of businesses. I mean, so this idea has been around for a while, and getting exempted, and then you file lawsuits, and then you end up like kind of, as Del Monte said, that hole gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
And luckily, I think overall we have a pretty good track record in eventually cleaning up the exemptions, right? So they're unfortunate, and like you said, Cynthia, they sometimes get a policy passed. You'll get a group, allowing, if they just allow an exemption for, say, for instance, in California and Manhattan Beach, when they were banning all tobacco product sales, they had an exemption for financial hardship. And that was the only way I think they could get this policy passed. And not many people, I think, have availed themselves of it, but putting it in there allowed that. Now, later on, if that's the case, that almost people aren't really using it much, and other communities don't even need to put it in, or you put it in for a couple of years and then eventually you get rid of it and clean it up. But it is really unfortunate when these exemptions right from the start have an inequitable impact, that a disproportionate impact. So you exempt menthol, right? And so and then it takes a long time to clean it up. We have these examples of policies that it's really unfortunate that we had an inequitable policy longer than we should have.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a great point you make, Kurt, because what we found in some cases, menthol has been that sacrificial lamb. And so as we're putting these policies together, and again, if we wanted them to really be equity centered, then they need to benefit those populations that's targeted most. Then you would think that would be the last thing that would be an exemption, but oftentimes it's the one thing that's on the table as a bargaining chip.
Yeah, and then again, all the extra tobacco control money that's going against that versus other good fights and efforts. So we'll move on to litigation. How does the industry use litigation to delay or potentially stall good policy? Is there a benefit to using this tactic, and particularly when when a popular opinion supports the policy that the industry is litigating?
Yeah, I'll start with just an example based on some of the work that I've done. Our team and I've done some studies on graphic cigarette warning labels, and these are a tool that we should have in place now, but we don't, and it's mainly because of tobacco industry litigation. So the first regulations proposing these graphic warning labels were proposed in 2011, because the 2009 Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act stipulated that we would have graphic warning labels. Really quickly, the tobacco industry sued. Both R.J. Reynolds sued, and then they won the lawsuit. There was an appeal, but we lost in that case, and the regulations were stuck down. Now, FDA came back not too long ago, a couple of years ago, in March of 2020, and said we now have new proposed regulations. They've addressed some of the issues that came up in the lawsuit, and now there are 2 additional lawsuits by R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company versus FDA and Philip Morris USA versus and Sherman Holdings versus FDA. They're both suing, and what they've done is they've said FDA was ready to put these into place finally, and they got the courts to extend the date in which it goes into effect. And the tobacco companies keep doing it. When I started preparing this presentation, honestly, there have been 6 extensions. The 8th one was just I had to update my presentation because the background work 2 weeks ago on May 10th, they got the 8th one, so that these are not slated to go into effect until July 8th of 2023. And the delay is really problematic, because when you look at the impact of these warning labels on cigarettes, they work. They promote people, they promote quitting, reduce consumption. And in fact, just this delay, had they gone into effect when they should have, there's a really nice study that was done on this in 2012, if they'd have gone into effect right then, we would have 179,000 preventable deaths. And so this, it makes a big difference. This is not just this is really, really, substantial impact. And we hadn't really rehearsed this, but I'm showing on my screen just real quick. These are what the warning labels that FDA has planned to put on the packs, and they should be on packs, but we don't have them. Anyone who travels will sees warning labels like this, and they work, and that's why the industry wants to fight them tooth and nail in court, and to block them, get them delayed as long as possible, because every year that they can eke out even more product sales, they make more and more money. And this is something that we should have in place. And I'm hoping they ultimately do go in effect and they stay in effect, because we need this. We're kind of like becoming as we've been following these studies, we're the world's control group for having among the worst warning labels in the world. It's very funny because we were one of the first countries to ever have a warning label, like in 1965. But then now we have about the worst. They take the second smallest side of the cigarette pack, and it's in small text writing, and they've not changed for 30 plus years. So we really need to get these in place.
Yeah, those are graphic. It's, bringing the TV commercials onto the cigarette packs. We could talk about what happened and why that is, what you just said about we used to be, have the best and now have the worst, but we don't have time for that, I know. Wow, so that's 12 years of delay, 12 years. Okay.
I think what we also want to emphasize is that's a case where the good guys won. I mean, this was, years and years ago. This wasn't, this isn't something that's, it's been up for debate, or that the court, hasn't decided. This is something that where, this is just to get the, the actual labels in place. We know that they are, the courts have upheld them.
Yeah, and speaking of that, Mark, it's just a good reason for us to say, yes, the FDA has a proposed, they said they're going to ban menthol. Yes, there's a proposed rule out there, but don't go crossing your fingers and thinking, oh, next year we're going to be celebrating menthol being off the shelves. I mean, this could be, the litigation hasn't even started on that, but they're preparing for it. And so this could be years in the making. And so, just like Kurt said, it takes time, it buys them time, and they're going to buy as much time as they can to initiate that next generation of smokers.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And we've even seen, I mean, it doesn't matter, the likelihood of success doesn't seem like it really factors as much into the industry's decision of whether to file a lawsuit on, either with the flavor litigation. And again, Providence, New York City, Chicago, Edina, Minnesota, LA County. I mean, all these, they have lost all the major cases, and they still continue to sue because they can put the policy on hold, continue to sell their products, and hope at some point that they can get some sort of a circuit split and potentially get it heard by the Supreme Court.
Okay, well,
sorry, I didn't mean to be negative.
no, I was going to ask you all to talk about the menthol cigarettes. I'm glad you brought that up, Del Monte, because that's a really important point that we have to make here. People think that it's yay, it's done, and it's good, but the potential for delays, like, oh my God, 12 years for the graphic warning labels, and it's still delayed. So I just want to ask, is there any way when policy is being made to avoid potential litigation?
I mean, I guess I can start, and we monitor litigation as closely as we possibly can. When we develop the type of assistance that we provide, when we develop model language or policies, we are always cognizant of what courts have said, and we try to draft those policies in such a way that they are the most likely to avoid litigation. But we know that this industry is, it's got deep pockets, I think is not strong enough. They use litigation to delay. Again, it doesn't necessarily matter whether or not they think they're going to win the case or not. If they can push it back, they're going to continue to make money and addict more people during that time. So we can do the best we can by developing policies that we know that will at least win in the event that there is litigation. But I don't think there's any way that we can stop the industry from suing.
Okay. All right. So I want to jump ahead to another topic that's near and dear to my heart, and that is a tactic that's used time and again, repositioning and rebranding of the organization, the company, to shed its reputation and to gain influence. Now we've seen it from industry front groups to acquiring pharmaceutical products, the little inhalers is one that I find particularly repulsive, and continued reduced risk claims about nicotine products. So, Kurt, what does it look like today? And how do we reveal the industry for what it is?
Yeah, I think it's a key point. This started years ago. The industry has been courting public opinion and knows that they have a public opinion problem, big tobacco. And Philip Morris changed their name to Altria, which almost sounds like altruistic. And they started with a sort of a corporate rebranding. We're a different kind of company. They've been funding a group that you've probably heard called the Foundation for a Smoke-Free Future. And they are saying that, we want to go smoke-free. They actually had a couple of years ago around New Year's, when people make their resolution to quit smoking or quit using tobacco products, they had a thing, we want to quit tobacco, combusted cigarettes too. And, even though they say that, they are, the way that they act in suing FDA, suing local groups, any group that's any local jurisdiction trying to do tobacco control policies, they're getting sued. And so the industry is going at them with a vengeance. And so I don't really buy this idea that they're really trying to completely go smoke free, and that they're really building, British American Tobacco has a Building a Better Tomorrow campaign. And they really are, I think they really have not changed. And they've just changed that before they would just double down and not worry. Now they're a little more socially conscious and problematic in that way.
Well, I think that we know that they're not about to walk away from their products and their revenue stream. So, certainly what you just said, and giving millions of dollars to political campaigns and elected officials, in conflict a little bit with this messaging, this rebranding messaging. I think we need to unfortunately move on, or I'd ask you for more, because I could go on like this for quite a while. So, we'll say that recognizing and predicting these tactics is a first step in fighting them. What do we do with this knowledge?
Well, again, I can't stress the importance of building community capacity, making our communities aware of this knowledge, of this playbook, because a lot of our communities, and like I said earlier, even some of our elected officials don't know about this playbook, don't know that some of the things that they may be voting on are tactics that the industry has been using now for decades to continue promoting their deadly product. And so the awareness campaign and what we're doing there and building capacity, that is paramount. And then providing these communities, making sure that these community groups that we're building this knowledge, making sure that they have the resources to do things about it, making sure that they have the resources to continue their engagement. And so, yes, it's good that they've got this information for themselves, but then having those resources to actually be able to take action is another part of that. And so making sure our community groups and coalitions that are on the front line have those resources so that they can act and do something with the knowledge that we're giving them.
Yeah, and just building on what Delmonte said, it's like there's a playbook and they keep repeating it in different cities. And so when you're up, you need to talk to your colleagues who have just been through this, and they can help really guide you, because you're going to hear a lot of the same rehashed, predictable kinds of arguments. And you should be ready for them, because you can just, the minute you drop your bill or you propose it, you can just wait for it. And you're going to hear, they're going to say, oh, the retail outlets are all going to go out of business, or, oh, there's going to be policing problems and so forth. And there's just a lot of myths. And one of my favorite campaigns, this is my final comment, I know we're nearly wrapping up. I was walking around New York City about like 10 years ago, and I think they put up a campaign, and it may have been a Truth one or a New York City one, but it said, if we ban smoking in workplaces, no one will show up for work anymore, like 1975. Then it was like, if we ban smoking on airplanes, no one will fly in an airplane, 1978 or something. And then if we ban smoking in restaurants, no one will go out and dine anymore. And there's been these dire predictions of economic ruin that would happen, and they just haven't happened. And so you're hearing it now. There's going to be social unrest and economic problems wreaking havoc if we ban flavors or restrict them. But it's don't buy it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay. Mark, did you have anything to add to that?
I don't think I can add much to that. I mean, I think that those are both perfect answers. I guess the only other thing is that I really, I think that meetings like this, where we're getting people with different backgrounds who we don't always reach, and can kind of get the different perspectives on this, extraordinarily helpful. I think we need to really get out of our silos and the people who we're always talking to when we're providing that education, because I think that it's all these pieces are interconnected, and we want to make sure that they understand. I think that, as Delmonte said before, that when we have state legislators who don't understand a concept like preemption and are voting for it because there's some confusion. We know that confusion is sowed by the industry. We know that it only benefits the industry. So I think it's, the education piece is just paramount.
I know you'd think, don't policymakers know about these tactics, but, good points. Just one last question about this. Does it make any sense to, for the public health community to litigate against the tobacco industry? In some of these efforts?
Well, obviously, yes, and we saw that with the citizen petition that was filed back in 2013 when the Public Health Law Center, and so Mark can of course talk about that. But when the AATCLC then sued, the FDA because of that, that worked. I think that litigation from the public health side needs to be part of a comprehensive. It's got to be part of a comprehensive strategy. You can't go in with just litigation, but if it's part of a broader and more comprehensive strategy, like we continue doing, and we're continuing doing the local work at the local level, we're continuing trying to do things at the state level, we're trying to sue, the suit at the FDA level. So all those things combined can work, but litigation just in of itself, by itself, probably would not.
Okay, so I think this is a really good transition to say that PAVE is powered by volunteers. And as you have just learned here, the tobacco industry uses their playbook to continue to protect their revenue stream at the severe detriment of our children. So it's important that we all put out our own counter efforts to protect our children and their future. So we would love to have you, the audience, join with PAVE to do that. There are important tobacco control efforts going on around the country. Even if you just have 5 minutes, your voice supports parents. It makes enormous impact on lawmakers, and it helps influence public opinion. So please get in touch with us at info@parentsagainst.vaping.org. So unfortunately, we have to stop now. And I want to thank you all of the panelists for lending your very important expertise on these issues. It was, certainly very interesting for me, and I'm sure, everybody else listening. So thank you.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.